Hey, everybody. Hey, welcome to your live event today. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction, and I'm also one of your instructors in the courses. Today's event is my office hours, and this is your chance to ask questions about food and cooking, and I'll do my best to answer them. All right. As we get started, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping points, and the first item is to please keep your questions focused on the domain of food and cooking, and avoid straying into medicine and dietetics and other outlying topics. Okay, and then also, if you're interested in participating more directly in today's conversation, and I encourage you to do so, take a look at the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll see that there's a dialog box that says add question here. And that'll go ahead and add a question or a comment, and that'll make its way to the queue, which you also see on the right-hand side of your page. And I will respond to it. And then the second or the last item I'll mention here is that within each of the already loaded questions, well, maybe I shouldn't say loaded questions, but the uploaded questions, is a heart icon. And if you would like me to respond to that question sooner than later, go ahead and click on the heart-shaped icon, and it'll bump that question up in priority. Okay? Now, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's series of questions. And the first one from Audi. Thank you very much for joining us again today, Audi. I look forward to your questions. So to begin, it takes me a long time to wash leeks. Since I watch each leaf separately under running water, what is the best way to clean and chop leeks? Well, a couple of thoughts I'll share. And, one is that often leeks will collect that very fine sort of dust-like dirt where the leaves sort of splay out and separate from each other, which is in that darker green section or area as it comes apart from the lower white section. And so if you can sort of quickly focus on just that area, you're bound to remove most of the dirt. And what I mean is that it's probably not necessary to wash the entire leaf. I also realize that fine dust-like dirt tends to cling, right, or adhere to the leaves. So it does require more than a simple rinse. You need to wipe your finger over it, or a towel or a sponge, whatever you might be using in order to remove that fine filament. But that's the method that I use. Beyond that, I don't get too crazy with the washing, but of course that's going to be up to one's personal preference. But if you can, again, focus on that area where the dirt, tends to collect. And then, another idea is to, split the leek down the center lengthwise. And then that also makes it easier to pull those leaves apart. And it can be helpful to soak those leaves at the same time that you're rinsing them off, using, again, a towel or your finger. Okay. And so, give that approach a try, keeping those points in mind. And I'm sure that you'll discover a method that works best for you. Thank you. All right. The next question is from Nordali, who says, unfortunately, due to my work schedule, I'll have to watch the recorded event. And which gives me a good chance to mention to all of you, right, that if ever you would like to see a live event, but your schedule doesn't coincide with our schedule, you can catch these in their recorded form under the archived library of live events. And I'll mention one more thing, a little plug for our live events, and that is that we have a large library of archived live events, and some of them are sort of general Q&A sessions like this one, and many of them are also topic specific. And so you might take a look at that list that we have and find a topic that particularly interests you. And those topics range quite a bit, from tips on plating to introduction to Ayurveda, to some key points around business, if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, for example. Okay, so back to today's program. To continue here, recommendations on tools needed. Okay, personally would like to invest in good knives and cookware. What do you recommend? Any personal preferences? Okay, so in terms of tools, first of all, I would direct all of our students to the tool list, the suggested tool list that accompanies our courses. Okay, and you can then see what you have and what you might want to look for in terms of adding to your collection, your toolkit. Now, when it comes to cutlery, cutlery is wide open, right, in terms of quality and price point. At the high end, we can look for custom knife makers that can create something that fits your hand, in an ergonomic way so that it's most comfortable. You get to choose materials so that it's really a bespoke product in the end. And of course, the price tag is handsome as well. On the other hand, there are a lot of choices in between. These well-known brands like Wüsthof and Schön and others that provide different styles of knife, but all probably of very good quality, really. And pricing is somewhere in the mid-range, not inexpensive, but certainly not at the price point of a custom-made knife or set of knives. And if you are budget conscious in any way, then consider the Victorinox line of cutlery. And these are from the Swiss Army knife people. And they have different lines of knives, like many companies do. The one that I have in mind is the line, and I think it's called Fibrox, Fibrox. And it's a relatively inexpensive line of knives. The blades are stamped steel. So they're, in terms of forged versus stamped, stamped is considered a lower quality, a more mass-produced. But what I find with this particular line of knives is that the metal is hard enough to maintain a nice cutting edge for a reasonably long period of time, yet it's soft enough that maintenance is relatively easy. On a whetstone, for example, and doing what you need to maintain that knife. And then the handles are molded plastic, kind of a hard rubber plastic material. Nothing particularly interesting about them, but they are hardy. They will last a long time, and it's not a big investment as you're sort of jumping into the world of cooking, but provide, in my opinion, a decent level of quality that you can enjoy cooking. All right, and on to the cookware. So in a similar sort of way, there's quite a range of cookware styles, in terms of the materials that are used, as well as price points. And, on one hand, I think that any type of cookware is quite fine. If you've got enameled iron, that's fine. If you have stainless steel, that works great. If you've got copper, tin lined, stainless steel lined, or something else, you can make any of those work to produce nice, flavorful food. It's just a matter of getting used to that particular type of cookware that you're using relative to some of the details that we share in our lessons, okay? Many of our lessons, especially when it comes to conversations around temperature, focus on stainless steel cookware. But please do not feel that stainless steel is a requirement for your kitchen. Okay, it's just, again, it's just a matter of getting used to what it is that you have, okay, and adjusting time and temperature as you move forward. Okay, so in terms of cookware, I will say very briefly that when I look at cookware, if I can get my hands on it, I like to grab the handle and the pan itself and just sort of give it a little bend if I can to see how rigid the overall piece of cookware is. And I want something that's going to be strong enough, a heavy enough gauge of metal, and an alloy, I suppose, that's not going to be too soft. It should be pretty rigid. Otherwise, I would expect a shortened life. And if we think about quality to begin with, we can use a cookware set probably for the rest of our lives. There's no reason why we shouldn't. Okay, and again, if your budget allows it, right, or if your aesthetics require it, you can always reach out for something like all-clad, or something that is popular and known to be good cookware, right? But also comes with a healthy price tag. Or you might consider cookware sets at the lower end of the price range that still provide a good value, at least in my opinion. And examples of those include Costco's Kirkland brand stainless steel cookware set, as well as the Hinkle's stainless steel cookware set. There are others, of course, but those are a couple that come to mind that I have some experience with. Okay, and yeah, I think that answers the immediate questions here posed by Nordelli. All right, thank you. And we have a follow-up question here that says, what do you think about the new Mizan line of knives? Or perhaps it's Misen. I'm not familiar with this line directly, so I'm sorry I'm not able to comment on them. If you would like to follow up more directly, please send us the same question at support@ruby.com, and I'd be happy to have a direct conversation with you, okay, after I take a look at them. But again, I don't have experience with them. Okay, thank you. All right, next up, a question from Leslie. Looking for a recipe for plant-based cheese that melts on a pizza when you bake it. All the ones that I have tried to make get crusty when I bake them. I have been using a variety of cashew cheese recipes. Thank you so much for your ideas. Okay. Yes. So, when it comes to especially the medium hard cheeses that are in the plant-based category, and I'll start by saying from the store, my experience is very much as you described it, Leslie. When placed on pizza, they tend to become hard, and they're a lot like bark chips on the pizza, and not enjoyable. Now, in order to get something that is melty, then more liquid, and sometimes that means fat, needs to be added to the formula. And choices are out there. I don't have a recipe off the top of my head that I can share, but I'll ask you to do a couple of things. One is to please visit Urban Cheese Craft. And that is a company that produces and sells cheese kits both for conventional cheese and plant-based cheeses. And the resulting products are pretty nice. And I'll ask you to first visit their website, urbancheesecraft.com, and see what information you might find on their website. If you don't find what you're looking for, please reach out to me at support@ruby.com, and we can further this conversation. It'll give me a chance to dig up some details as well. Thank you. And we have listed for you the link, okay, to Urban Cheesecraft. Thanks. And the next question. Hello, Bob. We are into the slicing and dicing part of the class. We were surprised to see that tomato seeds were being removed during this process. We have never done this and think they add some crunch. Is there a reason to remove them? Thank you very much for posing this question. And this is a question that I have fielded from time to time over many years. And the quick question or the quick response is it's a matter of aesthetics. Okay, much of the content in our courses comes from the restaurant world, so the professional approach to cooking, and in what we refer to as classical cuisine, and classical. Let me sort of qualify that a little bit. Classical cuisine is this, I'll say, old school approach to cooking that dates back 100 and 200 and more years ago. These are methods and techniques that have been handed down generation to generation, by chefs that were associated with hotels more recently, but cooking for aristocracy and other elites, I'll say, in society prior to the advent of mainstream hotels. And so in that context of cooking was demanded a refinement of the food. And part of that refinement was to strain out or to otherwise remove some of what was considered offensive, such as the beautiful crunch of tomato seeds. Okay, and so that legacy remains today. Is it required to remove the seeds? Absolutely not. And I encourage you to continue enjoying the crunch provided by the seeds. But do understand that in certain contexts, even today, in finer dining contexts, you will see that sauces are strained and otherwise lumps and seeds are removed for aesthetic reasons. All right, thank you. And the next question. I can't seem to dice onions into equal sized pieces. Can you give more instructions on this? Okay. So onions. Onions are round and they're layered, right? So the resulting pieces are, I'll say, rarely going to be a dice as you might achieve with a potato or a carrot or some other solid vegetable. Okay. Now, with that in mind, what we're after is consistency and overall consistency in the size of the cuts. All right. And this is more obvious, again, when we're cutting potatoes, but we're generally striving for the same outcome with onions. And so, and a approach to consider is, once you peel the onion, you cut it in half or vice versa, place that that onion hemisphere cut side down. You can make one or two or three horizontal cuts and then make your second set of cuts, which are vertical, right, perpendicular to the cutting board. And then your third set of cuts are also vertical. And that's going to be your final set that results in the smallest piece, these so-called dice. Okay. Again, onions are challenging, right? Because they're layered and they fall apart, and you won't have a dice per se or a dice exactly that results. But again, it's overall consistency that we're after. Now, based upon the context of cooking, okay, this is sort of a continuation of what I just talked about regarding straining out seeds, like tomato seeds, okay? If you're in a fine dining setting, or if you're cooking for a special occasion and you feel like making some nicer looking food, then as you carefully make those cuts on the onion. So for example, if you're striving for a call it a medium dice, which is a 1/2 inch cube, then right as you have the onion, you're going to come up from the cutting board a 1/2 inch and then make those subsequent cuts in 1/2 inch with 1/2 inch spacing. And then the second set, right, would be with 1/2 inch spacings vertically. And then your final cuts would be with 1/2 inch spacings across the cutting board, resulting in pieces that are basically a 1/2 inch in one direction or another, although they might not be a dice. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right. So again, if you're cooking for a special occasion, you want food to look nicer, then you can be very precise and specific about that consistency across those 3 sets of cuts that you apply to the onion. Okay. In routine day-to-day cooking, when we're producing food very quickly, maybe the look of the food doesn't need to be so precise. We might choose to forego that first set of cuts that I mentioned and just start with vertical cuts in one direction and then finish it up with the second set of vertical cuts. Okay, again, approximating the size that you're shooting for. Okay, so that's the way we deal with onions. All right, thank you. All right, next up is Cheryl. Hello. I'm left-handed and find chopping vegetables a real chore. Is this due to my knife or the way I hold my knife? Aha. So, generally speaking, whichever hand is dominant doesn't make a difference, under normal circumstances. And also, at least in the U.S. where I'm based, most knives are double beveled, right? Which means that the cutting edge is ground into the knife equally, well, in this case, equally on both sides of the blade, okay? Which means that the cutting from left or the right side would be the same, right? Another thing to consider is the design of the handle. And, usually knives are created with a handle that is either symmetrical all around, so it can fit comfortably a left hand or a right hand. In some cases, handles are created to fit a right hand, right? In which case that could be creating some discomfort, right, or otherwise making more difficult the cutting work. All right, so you might consider that. There are also left-handed knives that you can buy, and that refers to the handle, number one, where it could be created to fit more specifically the contours of your left hand. It can also refer to the bevel, okay, on the knife. And in this case, I'm thinking more specifically about Japanese knives, which are often single beveled, right? Which means when you have the blade that comes down, it's ground on only one side, okay? In which case there is a left-handed knife or a right-handed knife to consider. Okay, but that gets to be somewhat specialized. Again, most people are going to be dealing with an evenly double beveled blade. So this gets on to the second part of your question, and that is the way you hold your knife. And if you follow the suggestions in our video lessons, then everything should be fine. Of course, you'll need to make some fine fine adjustments based upon your particular ergonomics or your bone structure, for example. And don't be afraid to make small adjustments to achieve comfort. Now, having said that, okay, I will also say that as you get into cooking, all right, and you're doing more of it, you're doing a lot of chopping of most anything, but in particular hard items like carrots and potatoes, for example. The blade of the knife will often rest right in this area of the index finger, okay, on this particular joint. This will rest on the top of the knife, the spine of the knife. And this becomes sore, and it can become raw as skin is worn off. It can become red, it can blister, skin can slough off. But as you move through those phases, you will eventually develop a callus right in this area, or perhaps on the left hand in your case, at which point cutting becomes much easier because you are toughened up to the task. Okay, and so do keep that in mind as well as you allow your body to get used to doing cooking. Okay, this is another interesting conversation. You know, there's a whole posture and a whole set of muscles, right, that are required to do the repetitive work of cooking. And it takes some adjustment for most of us as we take on cooking at a greater frequency. Okay, so power through that early phase to get to a point of greater enjoyment. Thank you. All right, next up, we have a question from Richard. I have an electric knife sharpener. Do they work well, or is it recommended to learn to use a whetstone? So this is a great question, and one that I get periodically from students and people that I bump into on the street, believe it or not. And my response is it depends on you and your personality. Okay, an electric knife sharpener is a convenience appliance. Okay, so there are going to be compromises. On one hand, you can do the job of sharpening almost effortlessly and very quickly. Now, the shortcomings of an electric knife sharpener, and this would also hold true for a manual knife sharpener of the kind that has these wheels that you pull the blade through. Okay, and I'm envisioning an electric knife sharpener that is of a similar design, by the way. Okay. The shortcoming is that they may have just a couple of settings, so such that there's a limited control, right, on the part of you, the cook, who is hoping to maintain your knife to the best degree, and the resulting edge tends to be a little bit coarse when you compare it to a knife that has been properly sharpened on a whetstone. Okay, so which means that the knife may not cut as well, and that the cutting edge may not last as long. Okay, so that's the shortcoming that I usually see. Okay, with these convenience appliances or products. Now, on the other hand, if one is thinking of taking up knife sharpening with a whetstone, please be aware that there is a learning curve. Okay, a whetstone takes a decent amount of practice to get to the point where you can move that knife across that stone and keep it nice and steady at the angle that's desired. And to do that through the curvature of the blade as well, and to do that on both sides of the blade, right? In most cases, the knife is going to be double beveled, okay? And because there's a learning curve, if you decide to go this route, I suggest that you use a less expensive practice knife as you develop your skill on the whetstone. Okay, and then use your more expensive or nicer knives, because if the incorrect angle is put on the knife or uneven bevels, it'll take more effort and more grinding of the blade to fix it, to correct it. Okay. Now, there's also an electric sharpening method that I see at the farmer's market, most typically, where there is a person that's got one of these big wheels with an abrasive surface that you might see in a machine shop. And I usually see two wheels, one that's got maybe three wheels, but one that's got some abrasion to it, and then the final step, which is a polishing step. And I have seen some people do a very good job sharpening knives on those type of electric sharpeners. But I've also seen the results, just awful results, where people have just ground down the knife too much and have really damaged the blade on that sort of a sharpener. And so please be careful if you decide to send your knife out to a quote unquote professional for sharpening. Okay, I hope this this discussion helps contextualize some of this for you. Thank you. All right, next up from Hilda. Hello. I need to ask for assistance with task 62 in Forks Over Knives. It requires cooking mushrooms. Okay, so this sounds like the no oil saute assignment. I have a serious anaphylactic allergy to mushrooms. I can't eat them or even touch them. What can I use as a substitute for this task? Okay. This touches upon this broader discussion, right, of foods that people avoid. And, please know, this is for everybody out there, please know that for whatever reason, right, whether it's a religious proscription, an allergy, or simply a personal dislike of a given food item, that we can find a workaround, okay? Understand that results may not be exactly the same as what is originally presented to you, but so long as we are meeting the learning outcomes of that lesson and that assignment, then we'll be okay, all right? So in the case of this specific assignment, the learning outcome is to figure out how to saute without oil, which poses some challenges. And this is when we add oil, we deglaze, we might do this process multiple times in order to impart the color and otherwise cook the product in the way that we want to. Okay, so here you might practice with some medium dice of carrot, for example, which I think will provide the opportunity to learn how to handle the heat and the moisture and to address the sticking that often occurs without oil. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Thank you. And for the rest of you out there, if you encounter ingredients that you are unable to use, please reach out to us at support@ruby.com, and we can walk through your particular situation. Thank you. All right, I have another question from Audi, referencing task 137 in Forks Over Knives. And let's see, it suggests to consider doubling the amount of stock you make. So this sounds like the vegetable stock assignment for the basic veg stock. Since I'm doubling the recipe, how much extra time will the gentle simmer take? One batch simmers for about an hour to hour and a half. Aha. So, as we double the yield on recipes, the cooking time may or may not vary. And this is something that you will need to keep an eye on and just do a little bit of experimenting with. Okay, so my suggestion to you, Audi, is to maintain the same initial benchmark of an hour to an hour and a half, and then taste it at that point. and taste the stock, right, that is being produced, and is it rich in flavor? Is it going to be satisfactory for what you will use it for? I also suggest tasting the vegetable items in the stock to see how much flavor remains in them. Your goal is to extract flavor and impart it into the water, right, to make the stock. So if you're left with a bunch of delicious tasting vegetables, then they probably need more simmering time. All right, thank you. And let's see, we've got questions from Sarah. Hello, I have a question about hand rolling gnocchi. If the dough just smushes when I press my middle and fourth finger down and won't roll as I try to move it forward, might this mean the dough needs more flour and to be stiffer? The quick answer would be yes. That's usually the case. Incorporate a little bit more dough, just the minimum amount that you can get away with. And then, also take a look at the surface on which you're trying to roll the gnocchi. If you're using, for example, a gnocchi rolling board, which is the one that we have at home is about this big, it's got a little handle on it, thin board. It's got some ridges carved into it. That's usually easier to use because you can tilt it and sort of roll it down so gravity works with you as well. But if you're working on your countertop or a flat surface, try to find the amount of flour that's going to be a good balance. Okay, you want a little bit of sticking so that you can roll the gnocchi, and not in some flour so that it rolls, but not too much flour that it slides and gets smushed. Okay, that's also a problem that I've seen from time to time. So take a look at this issue from both of those angles, the rolling surface, as well as the consistency of the dough, and I'm sure you'll find your solution. Thank you. All right, and next up from Sabrina. Actually, I haven't touched soy. Actually, I'm going to go up above here and start with this one. There's a tofu tempeh section. I'm very allergic to soy. I may be able to use them, but I cannot eat them. Any ideas? Okay, then the follow-up, actually, I haven't touched soy, so I don't know if I can handle tofu. I have EpiPens. Okay, well, let's not push you down the path of having to use an EpiPen. Instead, let's take a look at a couple of solutions here. Number one, a possible approach to an assignment like this is to work with somebody that can assist you, okay, in the production so that you can learn how to handle these products, just in terms of your understanding of food, okay? And, if you choose to work with gloves, for example, this assistant can be your taster and can provide some feedback that will help you address the written portion of the assignment. Okay. And then otherwise, you can reach out to us, please, at support@ruby.com, or you can use the Q&A function on the specific task page to pose a question for possible substitutes. And then, one of our instructors or on our team here can help guide you through that process. Okay, in order to maintain your focus on the desired learning outcomes of that particular lesson and assignment. All right, thank you. All right, next question. I would appreciate any specifics on how to roast vegetables without oil, like what temperature and how long. Also, if there are any tips on making low-fat sauces. Okay, so we've got a couple of very different questions posed here. And for the first one, we do have a chart in PDF form that you can refer to and download, print out, and post on your refrigerator door as needed, or your oven door. How's that? That will provide some suggestions on given items, okay, given food items, because they all have different densities and different moisture content levels, and they can act and react a little bit differently in the oven, okay. But I'll first say, okay, that when doing conventional roasting with oil, it's super easy, okay, because the oil provides some protection from the drying effect of the oven, and then also transfers heat and produces caramelization on the surface of those cut products in a very beautiful and easy sort of way. So when we take away the fat, then we need to be more patient, okay? And we'll work with moisture, and that's often by adding some moisture. A spray bottle works really well, sort of a mister. But it could be done with a spoon as well. It's a little less clean, I would say, than using a spray bottle. And you'll do that in multiple steps or multiple stages as the product cooks, in order to maintain some moisture on the surface. Keep in mind that some things may be more successful than others, and that a lot of that is going to be based upon individual aesthetics. So again, have some patience as you work through this process, okay? But take a look at our lesson in the course that covers no oil roasting, and the lesson will go into more detail there. And then also take a look at the roasting chart, which you see on the screen right now, for some suggested guidelines on timing along with temperature, okay? And then this third follow-up question here from Birtukan, how can I roast potatoes? I would suggest, first of all, if you're okay using oil, to toss them very lightly in oil, put those in an oven. You might use a large dice, for example, a temperature of about 400 degrees, and cook them until they're done. Timing wise, it can vary depending on your oven, the type of potatoes, and the size of potato cuts. So I encourage you to test for doneness with a paring knife or a fork, or even the best way would be to put it in your mouth, take a bite of it, and check for doneness, okay? And that's going to help train you to develop a sense for time versus what you see visually versus what it is that's actually cooking. And that's part of the experience of cooking, okay? Thank you. Oh yeah, let me jump back up to Emily's second question on making low-fat sauces, okay? So, to begin with, I would suggest that you look at recipes for, in this case, low-fat sauces, all right? And that's going to give you some idea of how they are composed and what they feel like on the palate, what they taste like. And that's going to give you some initial insight to start modifying other recipes where you might want to reduce the existing oil, okay? And I suggest when making changes to recipes that you do it little by little. And so rather than, say, omitting oil, and I understand that's not what you're necessarily asking, you say low fat rather than no fat. So focusing on low fat, reduce the amount of fat, say by a half, and then see how that recipe acts and reacts to that change, okay? But otherwise, this is somewhat of an advanced question, and one that would be helpful if it were based upon a foundation of experience. And so, Emily, I want to encourage you to start with existing low-fat sauce recipes. Get to know those, and then you can take your experience to a regular recipe and start to reduce fat and have a better idea of what's going on. Okay, and as you start off down that path, if you have more specific questions, reach out to us at support@ruby.com. Thank you. All right, next question. Is there something that can be substituted for tofu or a soy-based product for things like tofu ricotta, tofu egg salad for someone who is intolerant to soy? Yes, depending on what it is that's being produced, the suggestions will differ. Okay, and so whenever we're making substitutions, and this is a general discussion. Okay, it could be any ingredient in most any recipe. Think about the function of the original ingredient. What is it doing? Is it adding a texture? Is it adding a color, a flavor? Is it binding? Is it doing something else? Is it emulsifying, for example? Okay, and then we think about substitutions that will mimic that function. Keep in mind that very often it's necessary to bring in more than one ingredient in order to mimic the function of an ingredient that we're removing from a recipe. Okay, so finding the right substitution can require some experimentation, some practice on your part in order to find that right balance. Okay, but back to your specific question here regarding, let's see here, tofu ricotta. Here you might try white beans and see if you like that. In terms of a tofu egg salad, you might try cauliflower, like cauliflower rice. That might have a texture that is satisfactory to you in this situation. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to mention, when we make substitutions to a recipe, we're changing the recipe at that point. So please expect the results to be different. Okay. This means that we may have to allow ourselves to get used to the new outcome. Okay, that makes sense, right? If we're changing something up front in the ingredient list, then the results are probably going to be different. Okay, and so we need to sort of change our mindset, expect something different, and very often allow ourselves to enjoy the new experience. Right, so this is food psychology 101. All right, thank you. It looks like we have a follow-up question here from Hannah for the soy allergy questions. Tofu ricotta. Okay, Kite Hill Creamery's almond ricotta might work. Thank you very much, Hannah. I appreciate your participation here and your suggestion. Excellent, excellent suggestion. All right, next up, hello, Hugo. Could you please elaborate on best practices to store vegetables in the fridge, how to store it, what packages, etc.? Okay, for storing food, there is certainly more than one way to store foods, and some of this, frankly, depends upon the particular setting and what else is going on in the context, as well as your own personal preference. You presented kind of a bit of an open-ended question here, but let me pick out a couple of scenarios. Okay, if we're talking about fresh vegetables, then one of the things to keep in mind is that the refrigerator is fundamentally a drying, a dehydrating environment. So it is helpful to provide some protection on this, around the vegetables or on the surface to protect those from the circulating air and the moisture that might be drawn out. And so consider covering the product with a towel And I will often use a lightly damp towel in order to mitigate moisture loss. Some things will become limp and flabby quicker than others, and some of that can be mitigated by providing a lightly damp towel as protection. Okay. For cut vegetables that are still in their fresh state, I like to put those in, again, but you got to protect it from the drying effect. So I put it into some sort of a covered container. Glass or plastic is fine, whatever you prefer. And then, keep an eye on the shelf life of the product relative to your usage rate. Right. So that's going to be an important one. Okay. And in fact, I'm going to get back to that in a moment here. The other scenario is that if you've got some cooked vegetables, and so this could be leftover food, or it could be part of your batch cooking strategy. In this case, we need to put that into, ideally, I would say, a covered container. Again, keep an eye on your usage rate, relative to the quantity that you're producing. Okay. Keep in mind that vegetables can be frozen as well. And if an item is cooked and then frozen, generally speaking, when it's defrosted, it'll look a lot like what it did before it went into the freezer. But if you're putting a fresh item in the freezer, it will often come out soft, okay, just due to the cell membranes that are usually damaged through the freeze-thaw cycle, okay? Excuse me just a moment. Okay, let's see, back to the quality of food in the refrigerator. I'm going to go back really to what is step one in my mind, and that is to look at the quantities that you purchase. So the quantity should reflect your usage rate. And if you buy too much food, then of course it's going to deteriorate in quality as it sits in the refrigerator. And this is where we might think about freezing the product in order to extend the shelf life. Okay. And let's see. Yeah, let me move on to the next question from Chrissa. Okay, Hugo, hopefully that helped get your thoughts going around one or a couple of approaches that you might try. Okay, thank you. All right, what's the best way to store cilantro? A couple of things come to mind, and one is to store it in just a little bit of water, sitting up like a bouquet of flowers. This can be in a glass, for example. Try not to let the water touch the leaves. The leaves tend to break down pretty quickly. And then also change the water daily. And then also use the cilantro as quickly as you can. Okay, cilantro is kind of finicky. It'll break down pretty quickly. And then another way to do that is to remove cilantro from a plastic bag that it might be in, and to gently wrap it with a paper towel or even a cloth towel. And you might experiment between using a dry towel and a very lightly damp towel. Okay, again, to mitigate some of the moisture loss that otherwise will be experienced in the refrigerator. Let's see, anything else come to mind? The other thing is that the freshness of the cilantro when you bring it home makes a really big difference. If it's fresh cilantro, it will do much better than if it's been sitting around for a few days at the store. Okay, and I realize we can't always control that. Therefore, try to use it as quickly as you can. Keep in mind here also that we can freeze cilantro. And, like other soft herbs like basil, let's say, you can chop the basil. You can, even puree it if you want to, and then freeze it into small units, like ice cube size units, to be used, in a sauce or in a chutney or some other form, of course, where the fresh, leaves are not going to be used. Okay, thank you. All right, this was a good segue then into the next question here on fresh herbs. I'm apprehensive with them since I want to fully wash fresh produce. What's the safest way to wash fresh herbs? Then I can't seem to chop them because they are damp despite trying to dry them. I understand. I experienced the same thing. And so, in terms of safest way to wash fresh herbs, I just simply run them under some cold water. And sometimes if they look sandy or particularly dirty, I'll fill up a bowl and sort of swish them around in the bowl to pull out any of the loose sand or dirt, but then otherwise hold it stem up, leaves down under the running faucet to try to pull out any residual loose dirt. A lot of times they come with a twisty tie or a rubber band around the stem, and dirt can collect around there. So untie it, and I'll grab the leaf end and then just sort of run the stems underwater as I move my fingers through them to loosen up any dirt that might have been hiding under the rubber band or twisty tie. Okay, so give that approach a try. And then when it comes to chopping them, I'll grab the bunch by the stem, and I just give them a 3 or 4 sort of slaps like that against the sink or against a towel, and that works for me. It removes most of the water, or you can use a salad spinner. And those are pretty effective at removing water from any of these sort of leafy things. Okay, when using a salad spinner, whether it's for lettuce, greens, or whether it's for a bunch of cilantro, I recommend doing an initial spin and then stopping and then sort of fluffing up all the contents and then giving it another good spin. And that usually pulls out more water that was, otherwise trapped in some way or another, in the structure of the leaves. All right. Thank you. All right. Hello, Elena. What oil-based coloring can you recommend for work with white chocolate? Thank you. Wow. Okay. So you're taking me a little bit out of my zone here in terms of, cake decorating and filigree work and this sort of thing. I don't have any recommendation off the top of my head, but golly, I bet online you can find some popular oil-based, of course, food suitable colorings. But I apologize that I don't have any names to pull out of the hat here. Thank you. All right, next up. I already finished my course last week. When should I expect to receive the certification? Okay, so PUS, you can go to your dashboard and you can download the certificate all by yourself. Okay, once all of your tasks are checked complete and you're 100% done and you've clicked that you finished the course, you can access that certificate and download it from your dashboard. Thank you. Now, if you have any further questions, please reach out to support@ruby.com. All right. Hey, Laura. Good day to you. Although traveling is probably the best way to learn about different cooking styles and cuisine types around the world, that may be currently difficult to do due to COVID. Are there any books you would recommend for that purpose? Let's see here. Wow. certainly there are probably literally a million books out there, right? Or pretty close to it that would address something like this. Um, wow, I'm stammering because I'm not coming up with any titles off the top of my head, but in my library here, there would be examples that I could reach for. Um, I would recommend that, based upon your particular interest, right, in terms of the region of the world, that you do a search, online and see what you come up with. Um, I'm also trained as a cultural anthropologist, and so I have other interests that intersect with food, like history and immigration and technology and medicine and all of these things that have to do with people. And food always rears its head because it really is at the epicenter of most everything we do. And so you can also look at the topic of food through these other cross-cutting themes, depending on what might be of interest to you. So again, you can take a look online, or if you want to narrow down your question and then direct it to me, we can have a conversation. Okay, thank you. All right, next up, what is the best way to wash produce? Rinsing, soaking, using a vegetable wash solution, or just water. Also, I've heard that mushrooms just need to be wiped off, not using water. Okay, so yeah, any of the above are correct and can be effective. Some of this is based upon, or all of it, I guess, is based upon personal preference. In terms of, soaking, there are, as you mentioned, these solutions that you can buy. You can also use a vinegar solution, which some testing has shown to be just as effective as store-bought solutions, and probably a lot cheaper. Some of this is based upon your time and space availability. Certainly soaking requires more of that versus simply rinsing. And then, of course, there are, your own sort of individual concerns, right, around the cleanliness of the food that need to be addressed. I'm the type of person that will eat food off of the ground. I've taken food away from a dog. Things like that don't bother me. And I realize that other people require much more cleanliness than perhaps I do. And in that case, you need to find your place of comfort. And if it means soaking items in a solution, for a few minutes, then take that route. If a simple rinse will suffice, then I think that can be fine as well. Okay, but you need to find your place of comfort. Okay. And regarding mushrooms, yes. Some mushrooms will soak up water, hang on to water more quickly and more so than other mushrooms. And part of this is, in terms of what to do, is going to be based on personal preference. Okay. So for example, I've been out a number of times foraging for chanterelles, for example. A lot of people, a lot of chefs, a lot of my colleagues will say, oh, don't ever wash chanterelles, with water, use only a mushroom brush, yada, yada. I've tried it both ways. What I found is that a very quick rinse, in order to get some of those persnickety pine needles off of the gills, is required, unless you don't mind the pine needles in your food, which sometimes I don't mind. That's another story, I suppose. But a quick rinse and then a little drying time on a sheet pan with towels is quite fine. The results don't vary when compared to brushing. So experiment with this. find out what is going to work with you in terms of your space and your time resources, and pick a path. All right. Thank you. All right. Hello. Let's see. I like to be the best chef, but my problem is language and technology. But I have a good understanding from day to day. I will try my best. I need to learn American food. Okay. Let's see where to start with this. I think, Birtukan, I recognize your name, in one of our enterprise courses. And, I recommend, as I would for any of our students in our courses, to really focus on learning the cooking methods and all of the supporting techniques that are fundamental to the kitchen, to good food handling. Okay. And you'll be able to apply those skills and that knowledge to most any cooking that you do. All right. Understanding also that as we get into more specific world regional cuisine, that you'll learn specific techniques, that might, be associated with that given part of the world. Okay. But the foundational methods and techniques that we teach through Ruby will be good for you. And so practice makes better, and repetition is going to be important. Okay. Now, one of the advantages of working in a high volume kitchen, a restaurant kitchen, a commercial kitchen of some sort, is that you're going to have repetition that comes with that volume food production setting. Take advantage of that. Really focus on the details of what it is that you're producing, the details of what you're doing, okay? And you are going to experience a climb right up that learning curve. And the other thing is regarding American food, practice. Start out with things that you enjoy, other things that grab your curiosity, and have some fun with it. All right, thank you. All right, next up, hello, Lisa. Just a quick note to say that I am loving this course and to ask a quick question. I remember reading somewhere, but now I can't find it, details about how long we have access to the course material, videos and recipes, etc. Okay, so, fundamentally you have access to the content for life. Now, what does go away in terms of access is the Q&A discussion and your quizzes, okay? But otherwise, the other content that you've mentioned here, you'll be able to review and access those things. All right, thank you. All right, and Jan says, practice knife skills. The knife rubs up against my middle finger between the joints. Does it take time to get used to that? The quick answer is yes. And this is a bit of a continuation, I think, from my earlier discussion on knife handling. And, depending on just how we hold the knife, we'll find that our fingers will rub on some part of the blade or another, especially as we choke up on the knife, okay, which is typically the preferred way or I'll say generally the preferred way to hold the knife, with exceptions, of course. So yes, it'll take time to get used to that. But also you need to figure out if your own hand structure might be leading to your discomfort, in which case you'll need to find some sort of a workaround, some sort of a compromise, right? Some sort of a middle ground, right? That's going to be comfortable for you. But generally, it's something that we get used to. All right, thank you. All right, so we have some feedback here. I wash and spin dry after chopping. Okay, excellent. I appreciate the sharing of your experience, okay? And this is going to be a successful practice here. So use a spinner. After you chop food, you can rinse it in there, and you're good to go. All right. And then the next one from Salivia. Suppose it's difficult to get the materials required for the task. Okay, and it's not available in place where I am, like I have failed to get tofu, leaks. So what can I do? Because I failed to complete my course because of absence of materials. Okay, please reach out to us, okay? And I suggest support@ruby.com, and I can help you, or one of our teammates can help you. And when you do write us, please provide a link to the task page or the recipe in question, so we can see the specific context and we can work with you to find a solution, okay? And part of this will also be to better understand what you do and don't have access to in your particular location. So any of that information would be helpful. Thank you. All right, and then the last question for the day is from Stephen. What's the best way to rotate frozen foods? Okay, so this is a great question to wrap things up with today. It's a short one, but it's a big topic. When it comes to food quality, okay, in the freezer, this is, I think, much like the fridge, okay, where best practice, right, is to what we call rotate food based upon what we call the FIFO system. FIFO is an acronym that stands for first in, first out. And the premise here is that the first thing that you buy should be the first thing that you use. And any subsequent purchases of that same food item should be used afterwards, okay, in order to maintain the best quality of your product. In order to help you along, it is the typical practice in professional kitchens, and also good practice in home kitchens to, use a Sharpie or, some other sort of a writing tool and write the date that you purchased the item directly on the package, or label that food item in some way. It could be a piece of masking tape on which you write the date, and then you stick that piece of tape on the food in some way. And then this way, you will know how to organize your storage area, including the freezer in this case, and which item to pull out first, okay? Which reminds me, I should probably do that in my own freezer. Now, the next step also, I would say in particular in the freezer, is to label that food with the item name in addition to the date that you put it in the freezer, okay? A lot of times things in freezers are wrapped up in plastic or foil, or they start to develop ice crystals, and it gets sort of hard to see. And so having a label of the food item name along with the date is most helpful, okay? But that is the fundamental practice, Stephen, to use the FIFO method with labels, all right? Thank you very much for this final question. And I want to thank all of you for joining me today for my office hours. And I look forward to seeing you again. In the meantime, enjoy cooking. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.